Now, we have an exciting panel today, and people who really don't need long introductions, but I will introduce them and ask each panelist to come up as I do. Khalid Bomba is the CEO of the Ethiopian Agricultural Transformation Agency. And for those of you that don't know Khalid, he is an incredibly smart, capable leader. Please come on up. Who has been a key partner in Ethiopia to transform the agricultural system. Also worked at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and is someone we admire a great deal. Thank you, Khalid. Kavita Prakash-Mani, the head of food security for Syngenta. We're lucky that Syngenta has Kavita and has a great leader for its food security work. As you know, that Kavita leads an organization of 25,000 employees around the world, taking food security very seriously, with obviously a strong commitment from the CEO there, Michael Mack. I'd like to introduce Brady Deaton, the Chancellor of the University of Missouri and the chair of the BIFAD board. Brady has put a lot of personal energy and commitment into Feed the Future, into making sure the United States government gets this program right. And we're very eager, Brady, to hear your thoughts. And finally, I'd like to introduce a very good friend of mine who just told me that this is her first visit to Des Moines, Iowa. But you should know she's been fighting for food security, hunger, women, girls, in so many different roles throughout her incredibly prominent career at CDC, at the Gates Foundation, and now as the CEO of CARE. And Gayle, Dr. Helene Gayle is a good friend. So I'm going to start the panel by, I think we're going to run a short video that highlights some of the Feed the Future partnerships, and then we'll get right into the panel discussion.
Today, more than 1 billion people worldwide suffer from hunger. We asked ourselves, not whether we can end hunger, but whether we will.
Have a little faith in me.
The problem was clear, and in 2009, the world took action. More than 40 nations and organizations came together, pledging more than $22 billion to fight global hunger. For the first time, global hunger became a national and foreign policy priority around the world. Since then, countries, civil society, the private sector, and multilateral organizations have worked with partner nations to invest in infrastructure, better technology, and nutrition programs to improve agricultural productivity and fight hunger worldwide. And for America's part, President Obama committed $3.5 billion to launch Feed the Future to help turn the tide on global hunger. Today, nearly 9 million children receive better nutrition, including during the critical 1,000 days from pregnancy to age 2. And incomes have increased for 1.8 million farmers. We are seeing results on the ground. In Honduras, 500 kilometers of new roads are connecting farmers to markets. In Malawi, milk production has increased 52%. And in Cambodia, training and new technology has increased rice yields by 30%. But there is so much more to do. Because by 2050, the world's population will exceed 9 billion. Food demands will require a 60% increase in food production, and demand for water will rise by 20%. To feed the future, we must continue to work together as full partners in this global effort.
Revitalizing global agriculture will not be easy, but it can and will be done. And if we succeed, our future will be more prosperous, more stable, and more peaceful.
Have a little faith in me. Have a little faith in me. Have a little faith in me. Have a little faith in me.
With special thanks to our friend Matt Damon for narrating that, I will turn to Helene. Helene, yeah, you're the CEO of CARE, a huge global organization that works on a very broad range of issues. You saw in the video a lot of the pictures of women farmers in particular, and a hallmark of your leadership has been a serious focus on women and girls. Could you describe how you work with Feed the Future and also how you see agriculture and working with women farmers in particular as part of CARE's strategy to create change at scale?
Yeah, sure. And first, let me just say how excited I am to have my first visit to Des Moines and be part of this forum. It really is incredible to look around the room and see so many people who are so committed to this issue. And you know, I think it's clear that the focus on food and nutrition day has really come, and you know, I think Feed the Future is a great example of that, because I think for the first time in a long time we've had something that really institutionalizes the importance of this issue, but does it in a very comprehensive way. You know, one of the reasons we're so excited about Feed the Future is because of both the comprehensive and integrated nature of it, but also because you and the administration has put such a big focus on the issue of women in the context of this. And you know, I think it's real clear that if we don't look at how women are central to this issue, we aren't going to have the real results that we want, either in agricultural productivity, particularly when we look at smallholder farmers. Most of those are women, but we have totally we have not taken the kind of approach that looks at the issues that women smallholder farmers face. So, you know, while women smallholder farmers, you know, make up the majority, we haven't been thinking about how to make sure that they have the same kind of decision-making power, to make sure that they have the same kind of inputs, access to markets, et cetera. And so I think those are the kinds of things that we've been working on. One example is the program that we're doing, in fact, with support from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Pathways program. It's a program in 6 countries, 4 in Africa and 2 in Asia, that really looks at a gendered approach to agriculture and looks at what are some of the real barriers that particularly, again, smallholder farmer women have faced. What are the kind of structural issues? What are the kind of inputs that will change their ability? And then using some of the ways that we work already as a foundation. So a lot of our work integrates with our Village Savings and Loans Association. So it's women who are already looking at increasing their economic productivity and using that as a base. They're women who are already working kind of in collective groups. So there's a great foundation to build on. Those are the kinds of programs that I think will give us the knowledge that will then be able to scale up some of those approaches and really look at, you know, how do we take a much more gendered approach and a much more inclusive approach to the work that we do. You know, again, the data show that if women have the same access to inputs, the same information, the same decision-making, agricultural productivity goes up. Women make different decisions around the kinds of crops that are grown, the ones that are more likely to be nutritious. Their families then have better nutritional outcomes. So I think, you know, it's by putting a focus on women, it is kind of a wedge that in many ways has a real ripple effect that impacts agricultural productivity, nutrition, family outcomes in a much broader way. And you know, that's why I think that approach within Feed the Future is going to have increased yield.
Well, thank you. You know, as part of Feed the Future, we've launched this Women Empowerment Index as a way to measure whether we reach women in our programs, and CARE is a critical partner in doing that. I'm also glad you used that example, because as we were working to lead up to the G8 at Camp David, we worked with a lot of companies, and companies like Syngenta that said, look, we're going to make investments, we want to be in these markets over the long run, but we're not sure we know how to reach at the last mile women in rural communities and how to target and how to interact in that context. So Kavita, maybe you could speak a little bit to the thinking behind Syngenta's commitment as part of that effort, but also whether you see potential to partner with organizations like CARE that actually probably already do in countries all around the world, have expertise and connectivity to that challenge specifically.
Sure. Thanks, Raj, and thanks again for the opportunity to be here and represent not just Syngenta, but the private sector voice, and it's a pleasure to be at the World Food Prize. And like you said, I think it's absolutely critical for us to find partnerships as the private sector company to be looking at agricultural transformation globally, and especially within the African context. I think for many decades, we've not had the kind of investment that has gone in, and we've kind of been held back by the wrong regulations, or just not moving fast enough, or investment not coming through, or not being able to work with civil society that has some of the solutions. So I think now all of those bits are coming together, and we're excited to be part of the Grow Africa initiative or the G8 New Alliance for Food Security and Nutrition, which then enables us as Syngenta, as an input company, to find partners to create those holistic solutions, especially for smallholders and especially for women. And we know that we can play a role in productivity and profitability enhancement, but we also know we need that regulatory framework, but we also need skills of the civil societies. And going to the women question, I think specifically recognizing that about 60 to 70% of the farmers on the field are women, and if we don't get them the right technology and the right advice and the right financing, we're not going to meet the 70% increase in agricultural production that we want by 2050. And we also feel slightly that it's not right for a large multinational Swiss-based global company to be going and telling how local societal frameworks need to work, and we need that expertise to come from organizations such as CARE. We also need help in creating all those farmer associations that then enable scaling up and replication much faster than we have now. I mean, there are 500 million smallholder farmers. We definitely can't get to them one-on-one on an individual basis.
Well, thank you. And Kavita, one of the things you just mentioned is your concern with the policy framework and the operating environment in some of the countries that are markets that might be relatively new to Syngenta over time. Obviously, CARE has been in these markets for a long time in a different way. Khalid, one of your responsibilities as the CEO of the Agricultural Transformation Agency is to create an environment that's more hospitable to the private sector. Do you want to speak to how you think you're doing in Ethiopia against that task?
Sure. So just as way of background, since the ATA is a very new organization, let me just highlight a few things about who we are and what we do so that it gives you a context as to how we try to create this enabling environment. First is to say that we are a government agency that has a limited shelf life. We've been created to create this kind of agricultural transformation by working across entire government structures, but also in partnering both with the private sector as well as civil society. We also have a unique governance structure where we report to the Prime Minister and a council that he chairs, with the Minister of Agriculture as the deputy. Now, one of the key things that we try to do is work with partners in developing strategies that go deeper and beyond the compact, the CAADP compact that Ethiopia signed, to look at specific strategies for the seed sector, the cooperative sector, or value chains such as teff, wheat, and maize. And within those strategies, we've identified a series of different interventions that need to be undertaken. Now, as a government, we also recognize that we can't implement everything. So it's really important for us to partner with the private sector, civil society, universities, and others to undertake some of these different interventions on their own. Now, what we can do is create the enabling environment so that they can succeed. One of the things, as an example, that we've done is work with all partners to amend the Sea Proclamation in Ethiopia. Now, the Sea Proclamation currently is over 10 years old and doesn't really reflect the kind of environment that exists. So the new amended Sea Proclamation that is now sitting at the Council of Ministers and hopefully will be passed by the end of the year through Parliament, because that is the commitment that Ethiopia has made as part of the G8 New Alliance for Food Security. So we hope to have that passed by the end of the year. But it creates a more transparent varietal release process, and it creates greater space for the private sector, both in terms of multiplication as well as in distribution. Now, our approach to creating this enabling environment for the private sector, I think, is multifaceted. So certainly we need the support and partnership with organizations such as Syngenta, DuPont, Pepsi, Diageo, and others. But we also recognize that there is a domestic private sector that we have to incentivize and mobilize. And that domestic private sector includes mid-sized organizations such as Helene Foods and Mulugeta. But also, we recognize that when we think of private sector, cooperatives and farmer associations have to be considered as part of the private sector. They have to work like private sector organizations, and they have to serve farmers like private sector organizations. And there are millions of youth that we need to think about creating entrepreneurial opportunities for them as well. So when we think about creating the space for the private sector, it's on all of those dimensions, and not only rooted, as sometimes we think of private sector as big multinationals.
That's a great point. Do you also work with universities as part of that?
We do. On a couple of, once again, with universities, it's on a couple of different dimensions. Unlike the US, where there's a land grant system from an extension point of view, Ethiopia has one of the largest, or actually the largest, on a per capita basis, extension system in the world, with 60,000 extension workers, with a population of 80 to 90 million people. So on a per capita basis, it is the largest. However, the ability for that extension system to access new technologies isn't as strong as it could be. So linking universities and other technology-generating organizations with this extension system is a really important part of what we try to do.
Excellent. Brady, that sounds like a task that you and the land-grant university system in this country ought to be able to help with. Do you want to talk a little bit about that challenge, but also the broader vision that the BIFAD group has laid out for how we should engage American universities in this challenge?
Raj, thank you. And directly to the point that was just made, the linkage of our extension system with our research base and scholarly base in higher education is really quite a unique model that we're celebrating the 150th year anniversary of the Morrill Act this year. Quite a profound assessment as we undertake these steps. So universities are indeed looking anew at ways in which we can create, stimulate, and build on the partnerships that are there because the need is so great. And there's a new understanding of the profound nature of change that's occurring today as we're experiencing a massive knowledge explosion, and the need to look at every aspect of that institution as we do that is very important. And Raj, let me commend you for the responsiveness and the leadership you've provided in a very important way that has stimulated not only the government agencies by your call for the whole of government as you've initiated the Feed the Future initiative and the new alliance, and that's drawn on, of course, the very foundations of those initiatives under USAID is a partnership with the private sector world, with the NGOs, with certainly the cooperatives, and with universities. And as you know, under BIFAD, we have attempted to instill a sense of the whole of university as well. And as we think of the whole of government, the whole of all the government agencies, the whole of higher education, we really are trying to move toward a commitment on the whole of our society to address the kind of critical problems that you have so eloquently spoken to at noon today in addressing the needs of the most needy, that first 1,000 days of a child's life. So in the universities, we are seeing a whole movement in new partnership development as well for much of the same reasons. We need the knowledge, we need the scale that is necessary to bring about change at the local level. And as a university, and particularly because of the land grant emphasis and the extension system linked with our scholarship, we believe that scientific discovery, and I'm quoting Kavita Jeta, my colleague, World Food Prize laureate, who's on the BIFAD board, yesterday in his session, knowledge discovery is a public good. And we're committed to ensuring that we work with all components of the private sector, both the corporations, the cooperatives, and the NGO world, to ensure that our technology and news discoveries are translated into application at the village level. We have to ultimately have those institutions and that human capacity at the local level where farmers have to survive. And I know Dr. Ejeta emphasized those points yesterday, and I thought they could not be any more germane to the kind of conference we have here. And you know, over the last few days, I think this year, this conference has been a conference of hope for the future. And it's come out with tremendous enthusiasm. And I just want to commend everyone that's here, and particularly that group of students who are here today, and seeing their idealism, and they are our hope for the future. And what you're doing at USAID and your cooperation with the private sector and other government agencies has really inspired a new sense of idealism among our students at the university. And so you are followed very closely. It is a great day for what we are trying to achieve. And it brings us back to those days when some of us in the 60s listening to John Kennedy said, yes, we will go in the Peace Corps and we will be sensitive to these needs and spend our professional careers trying to address them.
Thank you. It's a great note to close your point on, but I do want to figure out if, and maybe Helene, you have thoughts on this. I just keep coming back to CARE is this massive platform that has a lot of connectivity at the local level, precisely where, whether it's American university students or researchers from universities or technologies from Syngenta, where they need to reach in order to have impact at the end of the day. Do you feel that the connections are being made so that you're able to benefit from those kinds of partnerships, and are there any examples or things that we should kind of take away from the things you're most excited about and do differently going forward to facilitate those partnerships?
Yeah, I think there's incredibly more collaboration than there has been in the past, and I think that the opportunities for the public sector, private sector, the NGO sector to come together, universities, et cetera, has really been accelerated in many ways because with things like Feed the Future, as an example, agriculture, nutrition almost forces those partnerships. You can't really move the ball forward if you're not thinking about some of the very same companies who are involved in big agriculture. If you're not looking at getting to smallholder farmers, which can be done best by civil society, if you're not working with government to have the kind of policy framework. So I think it's the perfect area to really help us pull together all these different sectors and really do that better. I think it can be a great example for other areas too. That said, I think there are barriers. First of all, we talk different languages. We have sometimes different incentive systems, but I think we're learning more and more how to work together. I do think that funders, and again, I think USAID has taken a leadership role in that, but I think that funders really creating that space for more integration, more collaboration would help as well. And I think, again, that's an area where that's happening more. We do a lot of work in the food and nutrition space with the private sector. I know General Mills is here as an example, Cargill, others that we work very closely with, helping to connect smallholder farmers with these kind of global supply chain and value chains in ways that really create this, this notion of shared values. How do you really increase economic productivity at the same time that you're helping build new markets, getting the poor into global supply chains, et cetera. So I think this is a perfect area for us to do more in that. I think there are a lot of examples that are already starting, but I think there's room for continuing to innovate in ways in which we work collaboratively.
Well, I think that's completely right. And I come back to, we were talking about the General Mills example, but Syngenta has 25,000 people. Could you imagine a couple thousand of them, maybe not all at once, but over time, volunteering on care projects and programs in settings where they're bringing their technical expertise, or what would that mean to the company, to you guys, if you could pull that off as a partnership?
That backstage too.
And I think, this is the kind of space that is very, very motivating to our people. It is a technology company. We want to get our technology and best practice to the farmer and to see that productivity increase. And the recent announcement being made about building $1 billion business in Africa through extension service, through people on the ground, is where the energy of the company is in these developing markets. And you said at your lunchtime speak that it could be CSR or it could be core business, and we see it as core business. We see the potential, the responsibility, and the opportunity. And I think for our employees, the kind of feedback we got when they heard about the announcement from our CEO has been tremendous. I think, out of the 25,000, 5,000 are scientists. So the thing they live for is to see that technology on the ground. And I think if we can find those kind of partnerships with CARE, with others, with the USAID, we're doing horticulture centers in Kenya through USAID funding. That is extremely empowering and extremely motivating. So absolutely, I mean, any opportunity out there that you think we could partner in, please do come by.
Good.
And I think just on that, I think what it's also helped us to do is to do what we do well, and then work in partnership with others to really look in a complementary way. And I think it's really helped us to strengthen in all of our different areas what we really do well, not trying to do everything, but working in partnership. And I think that that's a real plus.
That. I mean, it's not just technology, because as a private sector company, and Khalid made this point, farmers are businessmen or businesswomen, and we want them to think like, like business people, so that they are making a profit and they are actually earning a decent living and having a developmental impact. And as private sector companies, we have people who can help provide that financial training, that business management training, and actually think about the market linkages. So it's beyond technology. There's a lot more that the private sector can bring through all the different functions we have within the business.
So given that, Khalid, what are 2 or 3 examples of where you see the civil society coming together with the private sector or creating some new breakthrough that seems to be making a huge impact in Ethiopian agricultural development for the point of poverty reduction? There's the commodity exchange, there's new investment on seed production. Like, what are you most excited about?
So I think there are 2 opportunities that I'd just highlight. We're a very new organization. We're less than a year and a half old. But the 2 things that we've worked on, which we're super excited about, first is the opportunity to leverage existing structures of government, such as the extension system, to push out new technologies. Now, frankly, what we've seen in a crop like teff, which is an orphan crop that is indigenous to Ethiopia, and there hasn't been a huge amount of research, is that simple technologies, such as using row planting and reduced seed rate, with a variety that was developed by with the support of the McKnight Foundation about 5 years ago. We started to promote that last year, starting simply with 2 farmers. Under irrigation, 2 farmers, because the other farmers couldn't believe that with reduced seed rate you were going to get a higher yield. But then it worked out so well that under the main rainy season, we scaled it to 1,400 farmers using the government extension system. And that worked exceptionally well as well, increasing yields by 30 to 80%. And when we went to our Transformation Council and illustrated these results, they said, well, this is a no-lose technology. Let's see if we can scale it further. And our initial thinking was, let's go 10 times increase. But instead, Ethiopia is an ambitious country, so this year we trained 450,000 farmers, with over 150,000 of them adopting the technology in our first full year of operation. So using these kinds of government structures, we think we can reach more farmers much faster. Another really exciting opportunity that links the private sector is using cooperatives and farmer associations as a way to include smallholder farmers into the global supply chain. So we have a partnership with WFP's Purchase for Progress program, where over 30,000 farmers in the maize value chain are linked into the P4P program. We have Diageo producing malt barley. So we have over 1,500 barley farmers that are linked into that. We have teff farmers that are increasing their productivity, now linked to the largest injera producer in Ethiopia through cooperatives. So we think using cooperatives as a way to aggregate and link to markets is a wonderful opportunity just by using existing structures and existing technologies.
So that's by using existing technologies. I know when we were in the room together with the late Prime Minister, who talked a lot about building more university linkages and more upstream technology that was appropriate and relevant because it would be strong land-grant-like institutions in Ethiopia. Brady, could you imagine accelerating partnerships in that area? And what, I know you guys just reviewed the traditional, long-standing CRISP program, which is the Collaborative Research Support Program of the U.S. government, and proposed some pretty radical changes in order to make it more modern, more efficient. Do you want to speak to what you think is required in order to realize the vision that was laid out here, where you can link that kind of extension system to a serious technology capacity development?
Several components of it, and I think it does begin in the way knowledge producers organize themselves. And we've found that it takes, for any given human problem, there's multiple disciplines required. That's why it's easy for us to talk about a whole of the university approach, to get everyone involved. We get our students involved in internship programs and international programs, working abroad with private sector firms to address some of these issues. We've speeded up our technology transfer process to make sure the knowledge is out there where it can serve. And it's critical that in areas like the CRISPs that we talked about, we just had a comprehensive review of those, that they are continually reassessing and focusing on the strategic priorities, some of which are global themes, which came out of the recommendations from the study. And across all the CRISPs, some components that have worked they're involved in can be addressed to issues related to water or to drought systems or to other issues of nutrition and medical work that's integrated in with the agricultural work. And then there are those that need to be much more specific in terms of narrow ecological zones and focus maybe on very specific types of crops or commodities or value chains, working with a specific type of pattern, such as cooperative development in some part of the world, or other types of markets, or the various land tenure issues that confront us in so many parts of the world. We were talking last night about some of these issues in Kenya as it related to credit systems. So yes, there is learning in so many ways that the knowledge base that we're working with worldwide, with partner universities all across the world, we can begin to address these issues and speed up that entire process. And the work that universities have done with USAID ought to be in a dynamic phase all the time. And you've certainly been open to those ideas, and it's been some important movement, I think, that we're going to see some real important results from.
That's great to hear. I do want to go to each of you with a question, and that is, what are one or two things you would ask the U.S. government to do differently to help drive better performance in the fight against hunger using these tools? And Helene, I'm going to start with you, but I'm also going to highlight something that I'm sure many folks in the audience already know, but before it was fashionable to do so, you took a pretty strong personal stand that I know put CARE at some financial disadvantage to not accept certain types of food aid that might create disincentives for local production. And I thought you might speak to that, but also answer the question.
Yeah, so we made the decision to where we thought it was a local disincentive for agriculture to not participate in monetization, the practice of taking food from the U.S., monetizing it overseas, and using that as a means of supporting development programs. One, because it was inefficient. You know, the whole transaction of shipping food over must be shipped on American carrier, all of those sort of things that cost, are slow to get the food to the local environment. And then the whole transaction that actually, in the end, the dollar that you get for your development program, you know, you waste dollars, resources all along the way. And so it was a very inefficient way to pay for development programs. But also it meant that we were taking foreign crops and often flooding local markets, which led to a depression of agriculture, the ability to have the agricultural yield in the areas in which we thought. You know, it was a program that made a lot of sense when it was first created, and you know, I think we all recognize that we also have to make sure that we're doing what we need to do for farmers here in this country, but also looking at what's the best way if we're really thinking about the long-term interest of economic development in the countries that we work in. So that was why we decided to opt out of that program, and we're happy that in fact that has meant that it made people take a look at those policies and say, well, no, you know, maybe monetization makes sense in some situations, but let's look at other ways, local purchase, regional purchase, other ways that really help to incentivize agricultural productivity and economic growth in poor countries. Yes, it was a difficult stance to take, but one that we still think made sense in the long run. and you know, are happy that it has helped to change policies. You know, if you go back to your original question about what are some of the other things, you know, one, I think, looking much more at this as an integrated issue. You know, again, I think Feed the Future has done a good job of looking at this whole issue of food security, not just as agriculture, but also looking at nutrition. And we've gone to not only talking about this as food security, but saying food and nutrition security, because after all, it really is around how do you make sure that the food choices are the right choices, that it's the right nutrition, not just that we're growing more crops. So I think looking at it in a more integrated way is one. I think continuing to encourage the integration between the different sectors. And you know, I guess the other is really taking a much more of a long-term view. And we all know that, you know, funding cycles tend to be short cycles, and we're talking about programs that really have long lifespans. And if we're going to have the kind of impact that we want to have, it can't be in 18-month cycles and 3-year cycles. It really, you know, I think we need to be looking at longer-term horizon and setting real impact measures, understanding that we need milestones all along the way that give us, you know, the sense that we're going to make those long-term milestones. So I think those sorts of things, greater integration, continuing to encourage the collaboration, longer-term horizons in funding in ways that incentivize us to look long-term and not short-term. And then, of course, making sure that we don't forget to put women at the center of the response.
Good. That's very helpful. Not all easy things to do, but very helpful. Khalid, same question.
Sure. You know, I don't think it's doing something differently. I would suggest it's doing something more, which is accelerating some of the USAID forward work that USAID is actually doing in supporting local institutions, but then thinking about capacity building slightly differently. Rather than focusing capacity building solely on the individual, I think institutional capacity building is probably something that could go a very long way in creating a much more sustainable system which will allow USAID and other development partners to have their dollars go further. I think ATA is certainly one example, but there are many other organizations, both in Ethiopia and throughout the developing world, that I think could benefit from a much more structured support system to enable them to work in the same way that you are trying to get USAID to work as a business. A lot of government organizations in Ethiopia would want to work that way, but they really don't know how to do it. So translating some of the types of institutional changes that you're trying to bring about at USAID to some of these organizations or some of these countries, I think can go a very long way.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I would add that I was with President Kikwete, and he held up the ATA in Ethiopia as an example, and one that he felt other countries, including Tanzania, may seek to embed some of the principles of that in their own work. And I know it's a testament to your point of how challenging the task is, but also to some success you're having with your model and with your leadership specifically. Kavita, do you have a thought on what can we do differently as the public sector, as the U.S. government, to help really accelerate this effort?
I'm going to say what Khalid said, actually not different, but more of, I think we're very appreciative of the role that USAID and Feed the Future particularly has played in bringing the private sector back into this conversation and into this movement. I think there's always been a tension about, you know, is private sector really set up to play this kind of transformation role? And we absolutely agree we should. And I think, you know, it's been really good for us to have that support from USAID. I think supporting the Grow Africa and the New Alliance, I think is a really strong, as a strong champion, is something that definitely we look to USAID to do. Because I think if we can get those frameworks to work, if we can get those partnership models to work, then I think we can really move forward. And we can't do it as private sector alone. We need that support from the US government and USAID and other donors to bring the disparate players together. I think Helene had referenced that. So I think that for us is very, very particularly of interest. And I think on a more, you know, Syngenta specific point of view as well, I think there are a lot of programs and projects that we can do as Syngenta, but very often we need some support in developing these pre-competitive frameworks. So, you know, how do you get farmer training? How do you get some very specific before Syngenta can even step in to work with the farmers, they need a certain level of investment going into them. And I think that would be another area which we actually value and continue to work with the USAID on.
Good. And I would say that's an area where, in particular, these partnerships are just so valuable. And I know we each have examples. Brady, Khalid mentioned institutional development. A big part of the report from BIFAD to the U.S. government was about, it was a nice way of saying we could do a lot better at building at real solid institutional capacity. What concrete action can we take to focus more on effective institutional capacity development?
I think finding those opportunities to strengthen the relationships between the institutions in all parts of the world, in the scientific and scholarly community, and in those areas where the technology transfer is occurring, so that we have faculty members, students, government officials all working together. And I think as you do this, and I think providing inspired leadership by the government is a critical part of that, so that we can say this is doable. And I think sort of a can-do attitude about all aspects of this, and then developing and strengthening through scheduled investments by USAID, the private sector, and the universities, so that we're building laboratories at the right timing, so that you have the skilled human power, human capital there to run those labs, and the scientific expertise in place that says, here's where we're going with those. There will be private sector involvement at all phases in that, but we can really be much more efficient in the way we implement the projects with that sort of master scheduling and timing of projects. And I know that's difficult, but it's where really we really have to get the job done at the village community level.
So, Helene, you have to build on that, because CARE is so critical to building local capacity and strong local institutions, but also is a big international NGO that plays a critical role. And sometimes there has been a tension between international organizations, whether the NGOs or private contractors, doing the work, and the kinds of partnerships that can lead to sustainable local institutions. But you've spent a lot of time thinking about how to bring that together. What's your advice?
It's a very important point. I think clearly more and more international organizations like CARE, and I know there's several of our other partner organizations in the audience, we really need to be much more focused on building capacity, being connectors, being knowledge institutions, collecting information that can really help people at the local level, but really stepping back from being the direct implementers. I think that, there are still going to be times where that's going to be necessary, particularly in some of the more fragile states that we work in. But I think a lot of our work now is much more, how do we make sure that the capacity is being built? How are we making sure that local institutions are really taking the lead, and that we're supporting them in that, and bringing global resources, global knowledge, and the rest to bear. And so, I think what has sometimes been somewhat a divisive issue should not be, because I think there are definitely very, very different roles that a global organization can play. We've got experience in 80 countries. We should be bringing experience from one country to the next and helping that country be able to do its job better, because they have the kind of the total global knowledge that can really be brought to bear. So I think that we're starting to work that out more, and I think that has to be the trend more and more in the future. Another point I was going to make to your original question, though, is the point about resiliency. It's another area where I think there could be more done, because when we talk about the food insecure, oftentimes we're talking about people in communities and countries that are facing cyclical droughts, climatic change, et cetera, where looking at building long-term resiliency is going to become more and more important for areas like, whether it's the Sahel or countries that are having more frequent cyclones and flooding, et cetera. And what we're really trying to do is looking at making sure that communities who know that they're going to have these situations build the kind of economic resiliency, whether it's looking at ways of saving crops, being better about storage, learning how to switch to crops that are either more drought resistant or more resistant to flooding. so that when they do face the inevitable times of crisis, they don't slip further into food insecurity and poverty, and that they're more resilient and that they actually bounce back better than they did before. So I think the area of resiliency is another one that I think we need to put more focus on.
Well, let's spend a moment on that because, you know, I came up a learning curve on this topic, but USAID is proud to be able to lead a program called the International Disaster Assistance Effort, which means we're the humanitarian provider when crisis hits. But the shocking thing is probably 80% of our annual quote-unquote crisis response fund is programmed out years ahead of time because people know that there is going to be, that the humanitarian needs in many of the places where that need is acute is actually quite predictable. Khalid, how do you kind of handle that? And Ethiopia's had some real successes, but also some challenges in tackling that, and then I think we'll have to wrap up our panel.
Although this isn't the focus of the ATA, because we are much more, at least in our initial stages, looking at the high potential areas and the high growth areas of the country, Ethiopia has put in place a number of different mechanisms to address this issue of resiliency. One is a productive safety net program, which is one of the largest in Africa. A second is looking at market mechanisms, insurance, for example, and some of the work that Oxfam America is doing to see if there are these types of products that could be brought to bear. And I think Swiss Re is also working with Oxfam America to see if you can aggregate different types of risk so that you can have different types of insurance for different parts of the country. So I think there are different mechanisms, both from a safety net perspective as well as a market mechanism, that need to be looked at to make sure that it's a comprehensive solution.
Well, I would just say, to Khalid's point and to yours, I think as part of Feed the Future, we see the challenge of tackling resilience as very much a part of the vision forward in terms of agricultural development and tackling hunger and poverty. Do we have time, or are we out of time? We have 3 minutes? Okay, good. So I'm going to go to each panelist then for your concluding statement. I would ask you to say one thing, one reason why you are inspired or aspirational about what's possible going forward. We didn't get into a long discussion of budget climates and fiscal cliffs and things like that. But one reason to be optimistic that's concrete and specific. Khalid, we'll start with you. We'll go right down here.
So the reason I'm optimistic is the fact that in Ethiopia, at least, there really is coordination now among the different partners, where, be it a private sector partner or development partner or the government, there's a recognition that each one has a role to play, and there's a comparative advantage that we should be focusing on. And there is a platform for that discussion to happen and strategies that are being developed around it. And on top of it, I think the technologies are also there, and it's a matter of delivering them at scale. So it makes me very optimistic to see some of the work that we're doing in TEF, some of the partnerships that we're developing with organizations like DuPont, because that is a pathway, I think, for food security for the country.
I think it's very exciting to be at a point of time at a juncture where all these partnerships are truly coming together. I think we have a long way to go, but I think to be putting smallholder farmers at the heart of some of these discussions and really truly looking at them as how we can enable them to not just feed the world, which they already do to a large extent, but also then bring up the bottom-up development in a truly business-like, with a business opportunity built into it. So we're looking forward to the next stage of this.
I'm optimistic because you see the partnerships developing at all levels of government, universities, communities, NGO organizations around the world, focusing on very specific priorities. And at the same time, we have a commitment to taking the long-term view and investing in education, because it has so many, many benefits beyond just in skills and the nuances of thinking, but it has ameliorative social aspects also that alleviate a lot of social conditions that are otherwise going to cause a great deal of difficulty. And I want to also applaud the scorecard. The Feed the Future scorecard, I think, is absolutely on target. I think you should be using that to encourage all of us to use metrics very carefully, continue to refine and expand them, because we ought to hold ourselves to a very tight standard in this regard.
Yeah, okay, I'm going to cheat. I'm going to say two. One, because of those 150 students who are here. So, you know, I always feel excited and inspired when I know that there is a future generation who cares about these issues. But the other, I think, is political will. I am just so impressed when I hear political leaders at all different forums talking about this, and particularly because it's coming from the countries in Africa and Asia and you know, in the developing world who are taking this serious, putting money into their own budgets around these issues. And so that's encouraging, along with the kind of commitment that I think you know, President Obama and other leaders in wealthy nations have made. But I think it is that level of political awareness and true political will that I have not seen before that makes me encouraged. And when I think about, you know, coming from other areas like HIV, where I worked for so many years, where it was when that kind of political leadership stepped up, put resources, the kind of will behind it, that we started turning the tide. So that gives me a lot of encouragement to see that sort of high-level leadership coming out across the globe around this issue in a singular fashion.
Well, thank you, and thank you for all of those comments, but thank you for closing on that particular point, because you know, I think we've been fortunate to have strong bipartisan support for Feed the Future. Everybody in this room is a part of building that political will, and the fact that it is so big and diverse as a community that comes together here every year to celebrate progress and push ourselves farther and build stronger partnerships is all part of the task of also building that kind of rock-solid political will that can power us forward for a decade or two until we get the job done. So thank you. A special thank you to our panelists, and appreciate it.